Hey guys, here is your do now for Friday, December 13th. Go ahead and hit pause and complete the do now on your papers. So your do now asks you to make a conjecture based on given information. It said to draw a picture to represent your conjecture. So if angle 1 and angle 2 form a right angle, draw a right angle. Means we need the box. 1 and 2 form the right angle, so split your angle into two pieces, 1 and 2. Then they want a conjecture. So remember, a conjecture is some type of statement. So think about what we know about right angles. Well, right angles are 90 degrees, so I can say angle 1 plus angle 2 equals 90 degrees. We know that 90 degrees makes things complementary. If they're next to each other, that makes them adjacent. Okay, you only need one of those conjectures, but all of those are good options given the information that they told us. If you go ahead then and flip your page, we're going to page 25 and 26 today. You're going to start the conditional statements notes today, and we're going to loop back to them together on Monday. Okay? So on page 25, couple vocab. So let's talk about conditional statements. This is a statement that can be written in if-then form. So these are statements you're familiar with. If this happens, then that happens too. When you have something in if-then form, your hypothesis follows the word if, and your conclusion follows the word then. Notice they both say follows, meaning the words if and then are not included within the hypothesis and the conclusion. Those are simply the words that sort of separate and designate where each one is, but we don't include the if or the then in the hypothesis or conclusion. If you need more time with these definitions, hit pause. And so we're going to move on. It asks you to identify the hypothesis and conclusion of each statement. If a polygon has 6 sides, then it is a hexagon. So if we do not include the words if or then, I'm sort of going to break off the word if. A polygon has 6 sides. This is my hypothesis, right? Well, you can write it all out or you can abbreviate. Then it is a hexagon. This is your conclusion. Okay, so notice we cut off the words if and then. They're not included. Question 2, the Tigers will play in the tournament if they win their next game. So sometimes our conditional statement is sort of flipped. So notice I have the word if. What follows the word if they win their next game? This is my hypothesis. I don't have the word then, but everything else besides the word if would then be my conclusion. Take a moment and do number 3. If an angle measures 40 degrees, hypothesis, then the angle is acute. That's my conclusion. So again, we're looking for those keywords if and then, but they're not included in the hypothesis or conclusion. You can also be asked to write your own conditional statement in if-then form. So the key to writing your own statement in if-then form is we don't want to change the meaning of the sentence. We don't want to change what should be the hypothesis or the conclusion. So I don't want to reverse the sentence. I want to try and keep everything sort of where it is, but I probably need to add a few words so that it makes sense. Meaning I'm going to have to add more than just the word if and then, or it's not going to sound right. So penguins are birds that cannot fly. Well, I don't want to question if penguins are birds. Penguins are birds. I'm not questioning that. The question is, if the bird you have is a penguin, so to speak, then that means it cannot fly. So penguins are birds that cannot fly. I could write as if a bird is a penguin, then it cannot fly. So notice everything is roughly in the same order. I switched sort of birds and penguins, but you're keeping the hypothesis and conclusion. So my hypothesis is still about the penguin. My conclusion is still about it cannot fly. So likewise in number 5, complementary angles add to 90. I want to keep complementary angles as my hypothesis. I want to keep adding to 90 as the conclusion part. So I could say if angles are complementary, then they add to 90 degrees. So again, when you're writing your own sentences, you want to keep as much of the original as you can. You definitely need to put in the words if and then. Main thing is don't flip the hypothesis and the conclusion. When we have a conditional, we also have what's known as a converse, inverse, and contrapositive. So this part is asking us to create the rules for how to write the following statements from the conditional based on the given example. So the example they've given us is that the conditional sentence says, if 2 lines are perpendicular, then they form right angles. The converse sentence says, if 2 lines form right angles, then they are perpendicular. So what they're asking us is what changed from the conditional to the converse. So notice here it was the lines are perpendicular, and then it was they form right angles. In the converse, my form right angles is in the front, and my perpendicular is in the back. So if you think about what we were just talking about above, to write the converse, I'm going to switch the hypothesis and conclusion. You don't have to switch every word. Notice they kept the 2 lines portion after the word if, but you want to make sure that you're switching sort of the important parts about the hypothesis and the conclusion. So if I look now at the inverse, if 2 lines are not perpendicular, then they do not form right angles. So the idea is I'm still comparing this back to the original, but look at what's changed. I've got these knots now, right? Those were not in the original sentence. So for the inverse, we're going to say that we're going to negate, or you can say make negative or put in knots, the hypothesis and conclusion. But the original sentence order has stayed the same as the conditional. All I've done is put in those knots. If I start with a sentence that has knots, I would basically remove them. So you're kind of making it the opposite. The last one's the contrapositive. So if 2 lines do not form right angles, then they are not perpendicular. Well, I've got those knots again, right? But I also have the right angles in the front and the perpendicular part in the back, just like the converse, right? Versus the inverse, see how the perpendicular was the front, the right angles were the back, just like the original conditional. So for the contrapositive, it's like we've done both. I'm switching them and I'm putting in the negatives or the knots. So that's exactly what we're going to say. We're going to say switch and negate the hypothesis and conclusion. If you need more time with this page, go ahead and hit pause and take all the time you need. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these rules and we're going to apply them to question 6 on the back. So write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the conditional. If two angles form a linear pair, then they are supplementary. So converse says that I switch it. So if two angles are supplementary, then they form a linear pair. Right? Because we're switching the hypothesis and the conclusion. If I want the inverse, I'm going to take that original sentence and I'm going to put in those nots or those negatives. So if two angles do not form a linear pair, then they are not supplementary. So notice I kept the same order, but I put in the nots. The third one then is your contrapositive. So basically I need to do both. I'm going to switch and I'm going to make it negative. So you can also think of it as taking your converse and putting in some knots. So we're going to say if two angles are not supplementary, then they do not form a linear pair. So for today, this is where I'm going to have you guys stop, okay? We're just going to go through the point of having you write these sentences. When we're back together on Monday, we're going to do another part to this type of question, okay? So what I'm asking you to do then for homework, again, hit pause if you need more time with these sentences, but for homework, I'm asking you to take care of the conditional statements homework, page 27 only. For the bottom question on page 27, I just want you to write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive sentences. On Monday, we'll look at how we take care of true and false and counter examples like the instructions say. So page 27 only, bottom question, just write your sentences. It gets uploaded to Canvas for credit like normal for Monday morning. And on Monday, we'll kind of wrap up this section of the notes. Hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you back on Monday.